Hey Parish Panthers, I've got Inkscape open here and I'm going to walk through how to make the base for our LED sign, the Make project. So Inkscape, I've just opened it, is all I've done to it. I want to zoom in a little bit so I can see my, my document page here really nicely. My document dimensions, so you can see, are set at 9 inches wide here by 11.69 tall. So it's a little bit bigger than a normal sheet of paper. It would be fine if they were just 9 by 11 will work just fine. So first thing I need to do is I need to make the bottom layer of my base. I'm going to activate my rectangle tool here. I'm going to click and drag on my rectangle. If you get rounded corners, that's simply you just need to adjust the little circle handles you see, drag them up, and they'll be nice and crisp. If you want them rounded, you can leave it down a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna go for the rounded look. I need to adjust my dimensions, so I'm gonna go up here to the top where I've got width and height. If you follow my cursor about, my sign base needs to be 8.5 inches wide. The base for the sign. It's okay if your sign itself is a different width, but the base has to be at least 8.5 inches, and that's so that it can accommodate our light strip that is 8 inches long that we're going to put in the base. So I want a base that's 8.5 inches long by 3.5 tall. If you didn't come up in inches, you just activate this little toggle here. You may have come up initially in millimeters, pixels, whatnot. You just choose inches, okay? I think an inch is better than I do anything else. So I've got my box, or my first layer of my base here. I'm going to duplicate it so that the next layers of the base are exactly the same. Our base ends up being 3 layers. So it's important that for it to look all nice, the layers are the same. So I've made, here's the outer border that my sign or my base is gonna be. I need to now cut the groove that's gonna go in the middle that holds our light strip. We want the laser. The laser's gonna cut any place it sees the blue here. And I want to talk a little bit about the colors that may come up here because I've got to make some adjustments. First off, this groove we're going to drop in actually needs to be a true rectangle with sharp corners. So I'm going to toggle up my little circle there. I'm going to adjust my dimensions of it first. Again, our light strip is 8 inches. So I must enter 8 inches in terms of our width or length here. My light strip is 8 inches by 0.38 inches. So those are how I get those dimensions. So just type those in and you can see that Inkscape auto-adjusted my rectangle for me. I need to make sure that the edge, one of the edges of my rectangles overlaps the edge of the actual base. And that's because the laser is a cutting machine, right? So we want it to cut anywhere we see a blue line. Because we want this piece of the material. This we need a solid piece of material. This we need a solid piece of material, but for this rectangle piece because that's where our lights are going to go. You may have your rectangles come up and they may be filled in. Okay, to adjust that, you go up to Object and you want to go to Fill and Stroke. Okay, so my rectangle is not filled in. And that's because if I look here, the X is activated. If it was filled in, there would be a little blue outline around the flat color, the fill, and you would have some sort of fill color. Could be black, could be blue, could be yellow. Who knows? Just going to depend on the previous user of Inkscape. But I don't need a fill. It's also possible that you may have made your rectangles, both when you made your first base or any other time you may be using the rectangle tool, and your rectangle's not there, right? It looks like you've drawn a rectangle. You see these dotted lines, but you don't actually see the border line for your rectangle. That's because your stroke, that border line is called the stroke, is turned off. That X is highlighted. You simply click that you want it to be a solid flat color, and there you go. there's my rectangle again. And you may be having a different color. Like you might have yellow turned on, or you might have green turned on, okay? For this project, it doesn't matter what color you work in. It may be yellow is sometimes hard to see. So that's why I'm working in blue, because in this case, the color doesn't matter. But what does matter with this project or this part of the project is that all of your lines are the same color. So just make sure whatever color you're working with, whether it's red, green, yellow, blue, whatnot, even black, just make sure everything's the same color. Okay, so I've made this rectangle that will be cut out so that our lights can go in right here. So now I want to actually group these two rectangles, the small one here and the outer border together. So I click on one of the rectangles, doesn't matter which one you do first. I press the Shift button and I click on the other one. I now group them together by pressing Control and G, and it's all one unit. The reason I want it to be all one unit is I need to duplicate this unit, this piece, so that we get all of our pieces lining up. I'm going to press Control D again, and rather than pulling down, I'm going to pull to the side. And you'll see why here momentarily. I've also got to kind of pan to the right here. I need to ungroup my rectangles, so I'm going to press Control, Shift, and G, and I can now see that I have two different objects here. I'm not going to adjust the size of the outer base layer because I want it to match the other layers, and at present it does. I do want to adjust this little rectangle. The rectangle here, I'm going to adjust it so that it will match the dimensions of my sign. My sign, so I've got it, I've clicked on the rectangle, I click on the rectangle tool, and I go up here to height. Remember, this height is actually not height, it's kind of thickness. The material we are cutting your sign from is 1/8 of an inch thick. 1/8 in decimals is 0.125. So that's why I'm going to type 125 in here. I'm going to move over to the next box. You can see that Inkscape adjusts the thickness of my rectangle. And in this, the box next to the W here, I'm going to adjust the rectangle now to match the width of my sign, or the length of my sign. So if your sign is 6 inches long, you need to type 6, and it will auto adjust for that. If your rectangle's 4 inches, type 4, it's going to adjust, and so on. My sign happens to be 8 inches wide, so I need to make sure my rectangle is 8 inches wide. Now, I want my sign to be in the center of my base. So to do that, I have to select my rectangle with just in arrow mode, just to select it. And now I want to adjust it being centered. So I go to Object again up here in the menu, go all the way almost to the bottom, choose Align and Distribute, and I get my Align and Distribute tools. Now, if I just press center, I don't think anything happens. I have to tell it what I want Inkscape to center this rectangle relative to. So I want it to be centered relative to the outer border of my material. So I select my inner rectangle, I press Shift, click on the outer rectangle, now I press my center, and there you can see my rectangle shifts nicely to the center. Now I'm going to click on my rectangle again, and I want it to come down a bit so that this rectangle that's selected, my really, really skinny one, pretty well matches up with the center of this other rectangle that's on the center layer of my base. Because remember, this rectangle in the center layer goes around your lights, and I want my sign to sit as best I can over the center of my lights. So that's why I make that adjustment. The only thing left for me to do now is to draw the little rectangle that goes back here that's going to hold my battery. My 9-volt battery is 2.5 inches long, by an inch and a quarter or an inch 1.25 wide. So I make those adjustments, and I have this nice little rectangle that will hold my battery. And I want my rectangle down towards the end of the sign where my wires are going to stick out. And again, I've got this groove here for the wires to stick out. So the last thing I need to do is group all these objects so I can shift them down. So I click on the one rectangle, click the other. Again, I'm pressing shift. That's how I get them to all select. So click the one, press shift, click the other one, keep pressing shift, click on this last one, Control G, selects them all together, and I drag it down, drop it below, and here I am. So that's the last step. I need to save my file. Go to File, Save, and give it a name, probably LED Sign Base. I can save it on my desktop and then take it and drop it up to my class Google folder from there. Good luck, guys. I know if you listen carefully, you're going to have great success getting the base to your sign made.